What happens when the past you buried sends you an invitation to its victory celebration? What happens when the man who broke you, the Alpha King who declared you barren and worthless because of your mixed blood, commands your presence at the ceremony for his new, pure-blooded heir? He expects you to crawl back, a lonely spectre, to be mocked and discarded one final time. He expects you to witness the triumph of the woman who orchestrated your ruin. He doesn't know you are no longer the broken girl he exiled. He doesn't know that you are not alone. And he certainly doesn't know that the greatest proof of his legacy, the truth he tried to erase, is not in the cradle he is about to present to his kingdom, but standing beside you, holding your hand. The invitation arrived on a morning drenched in the scent of rain-soaked earth and blooming nightshade, a perfume of peace that had taken Alara 5 years to cultivate. It came not by messenger, but by a cruel twist of magic, materializing on the polished oak of her dining table with a faint shimmer of silver light, the royal seal of the Moonstone Ridge Pack glowing with arrogant power. The parchment was thick, impossibly white, the kind of paper reserved for declarations of war or royal decrees. Its edges were trimmed in silver leaf, and the calligraphy was a masterpiece of elegant looping script that felt like a razor blade against her memory. It was an invitation, but it read like a summons, a command wrapped in the thinnest veil of courtesy. His Royal Highness, Alpha King Kaelin of the Moonstone Ridge, and his chosen Luna, Lyra, request the honour of your presence to bestow their blessing upon their firstborn pup and heir. Below the formal text, in a script she recognised with a sickening lurch of her stomach as Kaelin's own aggressive scrawl, were the words that twisted the knife. Come and see what a true lineage looks like. Come alone. A bitter, soundless laugh escaped her lips. Alone. He had always wanted her to be alone. Isolated, weak, a hybrid outcast without the support of a pack, a stain he could easily wipe away. For 5 years he had succeeded. For 5 years the silence from his kingdom had been a roaring testament to her erasure. And now this, a deliberate, calculated act of cruelty designed to reopen a wound she had fought tooth and nail to scar over. She traced the embossed wolf on the seal, a snarling beast with diamond chips for eyes. It was the symbol of a power that had crushed her, a family that had disowned her, a world that had deemed her unworthy from the moment of her birth. Her mother, a rogue wolf of uncommon strength, had fallen for a human sorcerer, a lineage that made Alara an anomaly, a creature of 2 worlds, belonging to neither. She possessed the shifting ability of her mother, but wielded the subtle, elemental magic of her father. To the purists of Moonstone Ridge, she was an abomination, a dilution of their sacred bloodline. Kaelin, however, had been different, or so she had believed. The fates had declared them mates, a bond that should have superseded blood, prejudice, and politics. He had sworn it meant nothing to him, that her heritage was a gift, not a curse. He had lied. The memory was a physical thing, a shard of ice lodging itself beneath her ribs. The great hall, the jeering faces, Lyra's triumphant smile, and Kaelin's voice, cold as a winter river, annulling their bond and casting her out. A hybrid cannot bear a true alpha heir, he had declared, his words echoing the poisoned whispers Lyra had been feeding him for months. She is a dead end, a barren vessel. He had turned his back on her, and the severing of their fated connection had felt like her soul being torn in two. She had stumbled from his lands, bleeding magic and hope, a ghost of a girl with nothing but the clothes on her back and a secret burning in her womb. A secret he had never known. A secret he could never know. The past has a long reach, a voice said, deep and steady as the mountains that sheltered this hidden valley. Rhys entered the room, his presence a solid wall of warmth and power that instantly pushed back the encroaching chill of her memories. He was the alpha of the Shadowfen Pack, a clan of powerful shifters who valued strength and loyalty above the petty politics of blood purity. He had found her near death at his borders 5 years ago, a wraith haunted by a grief so profound it had nearly extinguished her life force. He had not seen a worthless hybrid. He had seen a survivor. He had offered her sanctuary, and in time he had offered her his heart. He looked from her pale face to the ostentatious invitation on the table. He didn't need to read it. He could smell the arrogance and malice clinging to the parchment, the scent of Kaelin's magic like a foul pollutant in their clean air. "He wants you to witness his glory," Rhys stated, his voice devoid of surprise but laced with a low, protective growl. "He wants to parade his success in front of the woman he tried to destroy." Elara finally looked up, and the haunted look in her eyes was slowly being replaced by something else, something harder and colder. It was the glint of forged steel. "He thinks I'm still the same girl he threw away," she said, her voice quiet but vibrating with a newfound strength. "He thinks I've spent the last 5 years weeping in the wilderness. He wants to show his pack that he was right to choose Lyra, that she gave him the heir I never could." Rhys moved to stand behind her, his large warm hands resting on her shoulders, a silent offering of his immense power. He was an alpha of alphas, his lineage as old and powerful as any, yet he wore his strength with a quiet confidence that Kaelin, for all his bluster, could never hope to match. "And what will you do?" he asked, his tone gentle, leaving the choice entirely to her. This was her battle, her past. He would be her sword and her shield, but she had to be the one to decide to fight. For a long moment she stared at the invitation, at the cruel, handwritten words. "Come alone." He was so certain of her isolation, so confident in her defeat. A slow, dangerous smile touched her lips. It was a smile Rhys had rarely seen, a predator's smile that spoke of her father's arcane power and her mother's wild spirit. "He requests the honour of my presence," she whispered, the words tasting of vengeance. "It would be rude not to accept." She picked up the invitation, the thick paper crinkling in her grip. "But I have no intention of going alone." The decision was made, not with a shout of defiance, but with a quiet, lethal certainty that settled deep in her bones. The king wanted a show. She would give him a spectacle that would burn his kingdom to the ground. The past was no longer a ghost to be feared, it was a weapon to be wielded. And she was finally ready to strike back, to show the Alpha King what a true lineage, her lineage, truly looked like. The great hall of Moonstone Ridge was etched into her memory with the precision of a master carver, wielding a blade on living wood. Every detail was a fresh cut, a new wave of remembered agony. She could feel the cold emanating from the towering stone pillars, see the moonlight filtering through the high, arched windows, casting long, accusing shadows on the floor. In her mind, she was 19 again, standing in the centre of that vast, echoing space, the eyes of the entire pack boring into her like 1,000 tiny drills. The air had been thick with the scent of their contempt, a cloying mix of pity and scorn that choked the very air from her lungs. Kaelin stood on the dais, elevated and remote, a king pronouncing judgment upon a common traitor. Beside him, Lyra was a vision in white silk, her golden hair braided with moon-petal flowers, her expression a perfect mask of sorrowful sympathy that fooled no one, least of all Elara. Lyra, her childhood friend, the one who had shared her secrets and dried her tears, had been the serpent in her garden all along. She had coveted Kaelin from the moment the fates had marked him for another, and she had spent years poisoning the well, whispering doubts into his ear about Elara's mixed blood, her supposed instability, her inability to produce a strong, pure-blooded heir. Her whispers had found fertile ground in Kaelin's pride, an arrogance that chafed at the idea of being bound to someone the pack elders saw as inferior. The ceremony was supposed to have been their formal bonding, the final ritual to solidify her place as Luna. Instead, it had become her trial and her execution. "The bond of the fates is a sacred trust," Kaelin's voice had boomed, each word a hammer blow against her heart. "It is a promise of strength, of continuity, of a pure and powerful lineage that will lead this pack for generations to come. But the fates can be mistaken. They do not account for flaws in the blood." A collective murmur had rippled through the assembled pack, a sound of grim affirmation. They had always seen her as a flaw, a genetic misstep. Kaelin was merely giving voice to their deepest prejudices. He had looked down at her then, his silver eyes, once so full of warmth and adoration, now as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm. Elara of no true pack, your blood is a dilution of our sacred line. The elders have confirmed my fears. A hybrid womb is a barren ground for an alpha of my stature. You cannot give me the heirs this pack deserves. You cannot be my Luna. Each word was a physical assault, barren, dilution, flaw. He spoke of her as if she were livestock, a faulty broodmare to be culled from the herd. The pain was immense, a white-hot agony that tore through her soul. It was the sound of the mate bond, the sacred connection the goddess herself had woven between them, being forcibly ripped apart. It was a pain no shifter was ever meant to endure. She had staggered, a strangled cry escaping her lips as the world tilted violently. Through the haze of her agony, she saw Lyra place a delicate, comforting hand on Kaelin's arm, a gesture of possessive support. The she-wolf's eyes met Elara's, and in their depths she saw not sympathy, but raw, naked triumph. The schemer had won. I, Kaelin, Alpha King of the Moonstone Ridge Pack, reject this bond, he had declared, his voice ringing with absolute finality. I sever all ties to the hybrid Elara. She is cast out from this day forth, her name to be stricken from our histories. She is nothing to me. She is nothing to this pack. The snap of the bond was a sound no one else heard, but for Elara it was a cataclysm. It felt as though her very essence was being flayed from her bones. She fell to her knees, the cold of the stone floor seeping into her, a cold that would live inside her for years. She had looked up, one last time, a desperate silent plea in her eyes. She had wanted to scream the truth, to tell him about the tiny, nascent life growing within her, his life, their child, the ultimate proof that he was wrong. But the words wouldn't come. Her throat was choked with betrayal and a sudden, fierce, protective instinct. To reveal her secret now, in this den of vipers, would be to condemn her child to the same judgment, the same hatred. They would take the pup from her, perhaps even see it as an abomination to be destroyed. Her silence was her only shield. With the last dregs of her strength, she had risen to her feet. She did not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction of her tears. She met Kaelin's icy gaze, holding it until he, the mighty Alpha King, was the first to look away. Then, with her head held high, she had turned her back on the only home she had ever known and walked out of the great hall, the heavy doors closing behind her with a sound of utter finality. She had walked for days, a hollowed-out shell of a girl, the phantom pain of the broken bond, a constant torment. The wilderness became her only companion, its unforgiving nature a strange comfort. It did not judge her blood, it only demanded strength to survive. And it was there, in the depths of her despair, that she discovered the full extent of his betrayal and the fate's cruel irony. It was not one life she was protecting, it was 3, triplets, a blessing of such magnitude it was almost unheard of, even for the most powerful alphas. 3 heartbeats, 3 tiny sparks of life that were irrefutable proof of her fertility, of her worth, of Kaelin's monumental world-shattering mistake. The knowledge had forged a new purpose within her. She was no longer just a rejected mate, she was a mother. Her survival was no longer a choice, it was a sacred duty, and it was that duty that had driven her onward, stumbling through the snow-dusted forests until she collapsed on the borders of the Shadowfen Pack, where a different kind of alpha, a true alpha, had found her and offered her a new beginning. That memory, raw and bleeding, was the fuel for the fire now burning in her eyes. Kaelin's invitation was not just an insult, it was an opportunity to return to the scene of her greatest humiliation and turn it into the stage for his. He wanted her to come alone. He wanted to see her broken. He had no idea that he had not broken her. He had tempered her. He had turned her into a weapon, and she was about to point it directly at the heart of his perfect, pure-blooded kingdom. "It is a trap," Rhys said, his voice a low rumble of caution. They stood in the heart of his own great hall, a space carved from living wood and mountain stone, warmed by a central fire that never died. It was a hall built for a family, not for a court of sycophants. He doesn't expect you to come, or if you do, he expects you to be a ghost at the feast, a pathetic creature he can point to as proof of his wise decision. He will have guards ready to humiliate you, to drag you out if you cause a scene. Elara looked at him, her gaze clear and steady. The fear that had been her constant companion for 5 years was gone, burned away by the coal fire of her resolve. "I know," she said simply. "That's why we will not give him the scene he is expecting." Over the next week, a quiet, intense energy settled over the shadow Beofen pack house. It was not the frantic energy of war, but the focused preparation of a meticulously planned coup. Rhys, with his strategic mind, began to move pieces on a board Kaelin didn't even know existed. He sent quiet inquiries through his network of allies, gathering information on the current political climate in Moonstone Ridge. The reports that came back painted a picture of a kingdom ruled by arrogance and fear. Kaelin had grown more tyrannical over the years, his rule absolute, his temper legendary. Lyra, as Luna, had systematically removed anyone loyal to Alara's memory, replacing them with her own cronies. The pack was prosperous on the surface, but there was a deep-seated unease, a feeling that something fundamental had been broken the day Kaelin defied the fates. While Rhys gathered intelligence, Elara prepared herself. Her preparation was not of weapons or armies, but of the self. She spent hours in the ancient library of the Shadowfen Pack, a repository of knowledge that blended shifter lore with the arcane texts of her father's people. She had neglected her magical side for years, associating it with the shame of her hybrid status. Now she embraced it. She learned to draw on the subtle energies of the earth, to weave small illusions, to shield her thoughts and emotions from even the most powerful alpha. It was a quiet, internal armor, but it was stronger than any steel. She also spent time with her children, her sons, Chaol and Caden, and her daughter, Lyra. Naming them had been a small private act of defiance. Chaol, with his father's startling silver eyes and a shock of dark hair, was a miniature storm of alpha energy, a born leader even at the tender age of 4. Caden was the calm observer, his eyes a warm hazel like her own, his magic already humming just beneath his skin, a legacy from her father. And Lyra, her beautiful fierce Lyra, had her mother's wolf spirit and a smile that could melt glaciers. They were her world, the living, breathing embodiment of her survival. They knew nothing of their father, only that a bad man had hurt their mother a long time ago. They knew only the love and protection of the Shadowfen Pack, and the quiet, devoted strength of the man they called Uncle Rhys. One evening, as she was tucking them into bed, little Chaol looked up at her, with his father's impossibly serious eyes. "Mama, are we going on a trip?" he asked. "Yes, my love," she whispered, smoothing his dark hair. "We are going to visit a place I used to live." "Will Uncle Rhys come with us?" her daughter asked, her voice small. "Always," Elara promised, her heart aching with love for them. "Uncle Rhys will always be with us." This was her reason. This was her strength. It was not just for her own vindication, but for theirs. They deserved to know their heritage, not as a source of shame, but as a source of immense power. They were the children of an Alpha King and a sorcerer's daughter, a union of 2 powerful lines that Kaelin, in his blindness, had thrown away. The night before their departure, Rhys found her standing on the balcony overlooking the moonlit valley. She was draped in a gown of deep emerald green, the colour of the forest, a colour of life and resilience. It was a stark contrast to the pale, washed-out dresses she had been forced to wear in Moonstone Ridge. Around her neck was a single, luminous moonstone, a gift from Rhys. It was not a collar or a mark of ownership, but a focus for her power, a quiet symbol of her new identity. "Are you ready?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. He was dressed in the formal black leathers of his pack, embroidered with the silver shadow wolf emblem. He looked every inch the powerful alpha he was, a king in his own right. "He will not see the girl he exiled," Elara said, her voice a low hum of power. He will see a queen. He will see the Luna he was meant to have, and he will see the Alpha who was wise enough to recognize what he discarded. Rhys took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. He will see the mother of his children, he corrected gently, and that is a power he cannot comprehend. He thinks lineage is about blood purity. You will show him it is about truth. She leaned her head against his shoulder, a rare moment of vulnerability. I'm afraid, she confessed in a whisper. Not for myself, for them. What if he tries to take them? Rhys's grip tightened, his power flaring for a moment, a protective wave that washed over her. Let him try, he growled, the sound a promise of annihilation. He will have to go through me. He will have to go through the entire Shadowfen pack. He cast them out. He has no claim. The ancient laws are clear. An unacknowledged pup belongs to the mother's pack, and you, Elara, are one of us. His words were the final piece of her armor. She was not returning as a supplicant. She was returning as a member of a rival pack, under the official protection of its alpha. She was not a rogue anymore. She had a family. She had a home. And she was about to bring the full weight of that new reality crashing down upon Kaelin's perfectly constructed world. The invitation had been a spark. Her pain had been the kindling. Now everything was in place for the inferno. The journey back to the lands of the Moonstone Ridge Pack was a pilgrimage through a landscape of ghosts. Every ancient oak, every winding stream, every granite outcrop held a memory. Here was the clearing where Kaelin had first told her he loved her, his words a stark contrast to the venom he had later spewed. There was the riverbank, where she and Lyra had sworn to be sisters forever, a childish oath that now tasted like ash in her mouth. With every mile that passed, the air grew heavier, thicker, with a familiar energy that made the fur along her arms prickle. It was the scent of her birth pack, a scent of cold stone, high-altitude pine, and an undercurrent of smug superiority she had never noticed until she had left. It was the smell of home, twisted into the smell of her own personal hell. Rhys drove the powerful, unassuming black vehicle himself, his presence a silent, grounding force in the passenger seat beside her. In the back, shielded by magically tinted windows, her children slept, lulled by the motion of the car. Her trusted beta, a fierce she-wolf named Anya, sat with them, her eyes ever watchful. They travelled not as a desperate refugee, but as a visiting delegation. 2 other vehicles followed, carrying a small, hand-picked honour guard of Rhys's most elite warriors. They were not there to provoke a fight, but to make a very clear statement. Elara was not unprotected. You are trembling, Rhys observed quietly, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, but his senses attuned to her every breath. Elara looked down at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. He was right. A fine tremor ran through them, a physical manifestation of the war raging inside her. Part of her screamed to turn back, to flee to the safety of Shadowfen and never look back. But the other part, the part that had been nursing a wound for 5 long years, knew that this was the only way to truly be free. It feels like I'm walking back into my own grave, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. He made me feel so small, so worthless. I'm afraid that when I see him, that feeling will return, that I'll forget the woman I've become and remember only the girl he broke. Rhys reached over, his large hand covering hers, stilling their trembling with his warmth and strength. That girl is gone, Elara, he said, his voice a firm, undeniable truth. He killed her. The woman who sits beside me now is a survivor, a mother, a queen. He has no power over you anymore. The power is all yours. You hold the truth. He is living a lie. Remember that. His words were a balm to her frayed nerves. He was right. She was not returning to beg for acceptance. She was returning to deliver a verdict. The vehicle crested a familiar ridge, and the valley of Moonstone Ridge spread out below them, a breathtaking panorama of sprawling forests, a glittering river, and, at its heart, the massive, fortress-like pack house built of grey stone and dark timber. It looked exactly as she remembered, a monument to power and tradition. As they began their descent, she felt a shift in the territory's magical wards. A probe, an inquiry of energy, washed over their convoy. It was Kaelin's power, the signature of the Alpha King, demanding to know who dared to approach his seat of power. Rhys met the probe with a calm, unyielding pulse of his own alpha energy. It was not a challenge, but a clear and simple statement. I am Alpha. I come in peace, but I am not here to bow. The response from the wards was a flicker of surprise and confusion, then a grudging acceptance. The path was cleared. They knew a powerful Alpha was arriving, but they had no idea who he was, or, more importantly, who he was bringing with him. The convoy rolled through the small town that surrounded the main house. Faces turned to watch them pass, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. These were the people who had watched her exile in silence, the ones who had whispered about the tainted hybrid behind her back. She saw no warmth in their eyes, no recognition. To them, she was a forgotten story, a cautionary tale. She hardened her heart against them. They were not her people anymore. The vehicles pulled to a halt in the grand courtyard before the main entrance. The air was already buzzing with the energy of the ceremony. Guests from allied packs milled about, dressed in their finest, their laughter and chatter echoing off the stone walls. But as the doors of Rhys's vehicle opened, a sudden, expectant silence began to fall. First, Rhys emerged. His height and the sheer force of his alpha presence were enough to command immediate attention. The visiting alphas and pack leaders recognized his emblem, and a wave of shocked whispers spread through the crowd. What was the reclusive, powerful alpha of the Shadowfen pack doing here? He had not attended a Moonstone Ridge gathering in decades. Rhys ignored the stares, his expression impassive as he rounded the vehicle and opened her door. And then Elara stepped out. The transformation was absolute. She was not the gaunt, heartbroken 19-year-old who had fled in disgrace. The woman who now stood in the courtyard was breathtaking. Her emerald gown clung to her form, a vibrant splash of life against the bleak grey stone. Her dark hair was styled in an elegant, regal arrangement, and the moonstone at her throat seemed to pulse with a soft inner light. Her face, once thin with grief, was now sculpted with a quiet confidence and a strength that radiated from her very bones. She held herself with the poise of a queen, her gaze sweeping over the stunned crowd with a cool, unreadable expression. The whispers died instantly, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. It was a silence of disbelief, of shock, of a dawning, horrified recognition. They remembered her. But this woman, this powerful, radiant creature, was not the girl they had cast out. This was someone else entirely. And she was not alone. Behind her, Anya stepped out of the car, followed by the honor guard, their disciplined, formidable presence a stark contrast to the preening courtiers of Moonstone Ridge. They formed a protective semicircle, their message clear and unmistakable. She was under their protection. This was not a plea for mercy. This was an arrival. Elara took a deep breath, the cold, familiar air filling her lungs. She could feel Kaelin's attention snap towards them from inside the great hall, a jolt of pure, undiluted shock. The show had begun. With Rhys at her side, she started her slow, deliberate walk towards the massive oak doors of the pack house, each step an earthquake, each beat of her heart a drumbeat of impending war. The great oak doors of the hall were thrown open before they could reach them, not as a gesture of welcome, but as an act of confrontation. Two of Kaelin's personal guards, hulking brutes in the silver and grey livery of the Royal Guard, stood on either side, their arms crossed, their faces set in grim lines of intimidation. They were a wall of muscle and prejudice, meant to halt her progress, to remind her of her place, or rather, her lack of one. The crowd in the courtyard held its collective breath, anticipating a clash. They expected the exiled hybrid to be turned away, to be humiliated at the very threshold of the hall she was once meant to rule. Elara did not falter. She did not even look at the guards. Her gaze was fixed on the open doorway, on the light and noise spilling out from the celebration within. Rhys, walking beside her, let out a low, almost inaudible growl. It was not a sound of aggression, but of pure, unadulterated power. The air around them grew heavy, pressing down on the two guards with an invisible, crushing weight. It was the full force of his alpha command, a silent decree that they were less than insects in his path. The guards pale, their carefully constructed mass of arrogance crumbling. Their shifter instincts screamed at them to submit, to bow before this overwhelming force. Sweat beaded on their foreheads as they fought the primal urge to drop to their knees. Without a word, they stepped aside, their movements stiff with a mixture of fear and humiliation. The path was clear. A gasp rippled through the onlookers. They had just witnessed a silent, devastating display of dominance. The Alpha of Shadowfen had not even raised his voice, yet he had utterly broken the will of the Alpha King's elite guard. The implications were staggering. Ilara and Rhys stepped across the threshold, and the world seemed to fall away into silence. The great hall was even more grand than her memory allowed. Silver and white banners hung from the rafters, depicting the proud history of the Moonstone Ridge Alphas. A massive ice sculpture of a howling wolf dominated the centre of the room. Hundreds of guests, the elite of the shifter world, were gathered, their faces a sea of glittering jewels and forced smiles. On the dais at the far end of the hall, Kaelin stood beside a gilded cradle, his hand resting possessively on it. Lyra was at his side, radiant in a gown of pure white, the very picture of the perfect Luna. They had been in the middle of a speech, Kaelin's voice booming with pride as he spoke of his heir, of the future, of the strength of a pure bloodline. But his words had choked off the moment he felt Rhys's power at his door. Now he stood frozen, his silver eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fury. Lyra's painted smile was frozen on her face, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure venom as she recognized the woman who was supposed to be a forgotten, broken memory. All sound ceased. The music died. The chatter stopped. The clinking of glasses, the rustle of silk, everything vanished. The only sound was the soft, deliberate tap of Ilara's shoes on the stone floor as she and Rhys began their long walk towards the dais. It was the walk she had failed to complete 5 years ago. This time, she would finish it. Her gaze locked with Kaelin's across the vast expanse of the hall. She saw the storm gathering in his eyes, the tightening of his jaw, the way his hand clenched into a fist on the edge of the cradle. He was furious. His perfectly orchestrated celebration, his moment of ultimate triumph, had been hijacked. He had intended for her to be a footnote, a pathetic spectacle on the sidelines. Instead, she had become the main event. With every step she took, she could feel the power balance in the room shifting. She was no longer the accused, standing in the centre of the floor to be judged. She was the accuser, marching towards the throne to deliver her own judgment. The guests parted before them like water before the prow of a ship, their faces a gallery of shock, confusion, and dawning fascination. They could sense the history, the tension, the monumental drama unfolding before their very eyes. This was no longer a pup ceremony, it was a reckoning. Rhys remained a silent, formidable presence at her side. He was her shield, his power, a clear declaration that she could not be touched, could not be dismissed. His presence legitimized her, elevated her. She was not a rogue seeking pity. She was a sovereign guest, Gemnuts accompanied by a king. They came to a halt at the foot of the dais, looking up at the two people who had destroyed her life. The proximity was dizzying. Kaelin was just as she remembered him, devastatingly handsome, radiating a raw power that had once made her weak in the knees. Now it just felt hollow, brittle. His power was a roaring fire, but it lacked the deep, unshakable core of Rhys's mountain-like strength. Lyra was still beautiful, but up close, Ilara could see the faint lines of anxiety around her eyes, the desperate tightness of her grip on Kaelin's arm. She was a queen, ruling on a throne of lies, and the foundation was beginning to crack. "Ilara?" Kaelin finally managed to say, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He forced a semblance of a smile, a predator's baring of teeth. What an unexpected surprise. I didn't think you would have the courage to show your face here. He was trying to regain control, to frame her appearance as an act of pathetic desperation. You invited me, Ilara replied, her voice calm and clear, carrying easily through the silent hall. You commanded my presence. I am merely obeying my former Alpha King's decree. The subtle emphasis on former was a perfectly aimed dart. It reminded everyone in the room that she was no longer under his rule, no longer subject to his whims. Kaelin's eyes flashed with anger. You were told to come alone, he snarled, his gaze shifting to Rhys with open hostility. And who is this? Have you found a new master to serve, little hybrid? The insult was crude, designed to demean both her and Rhys. Rhys did not rise to the bait. He simply inclined his head, a gesture of regal courtesy that was somehow more insulting than any retort. I am Rhys, Alpha of the Shadowfen Pack, he stated, his voice resonating with a power that made the very stones of the hall seem to vibrate. And I am not her master. I am her ally. Ilara is a cherished member of my pack, and I am here as her guest. The collective intake of breath in the room was sharp and sudden. A cherished member of the Shadowfen Pack. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly. She wasn't a rogue. She wasn't an outcast. She had been given sanctuary, a home, by one of the most respected and feared alphas on the continent. Kaelin's entire narrative, that she was a worthless stray he had mercifully cast off, had just been shattered. He looked from Rhys's impassive face to Ilara's serene one, and for the first time a flicker of genuine uncertainty entered his eyes. This was not going according to his plan. This was not the broken, weeping girl he had been expecting. This was something else entirely. Something dangerous. Kaelin's mind reeled, struggling to process the scene before him. This was wrong. All wrong. Ilara was supposed to be a spectre, a cautionary tale made flesh. He had envisioned her arrival, if she dared to come at all, as a moment of supreme satisfaction. He would have seen her hunched and worn, her spirit extinguished, the poverty of her lonely existence etched on her face. Her presence would have been the final perfect contrast to Lyra's radiant beauty and the promise of his pure-blooded heir. It was to be the ultimate justification of his choice, a public affirmation of his wisdom. Instead, this woman stood before him, a vision of regal defiance. She was more beautiful than he remembered, infused with a power and a confidence that made her utterly captivating, and she was not alone. The Alpha of Shadow. Fen, a male Kaelin knew by reputation as a reclusive and immensely powerful leader, stood by her side as an equal. Not a master, but an ally. The word hung in the air, a poison to Kaelin's pride. It implied respect, value, worth, all the things he had declared Ilara lacked. An ally, Kaelin repeated, his voice dripping with scorn as he tried to claw back his authority. How quaint. Has the great Shadowfen Alpha resorted to collecting stray dogs from my borders? He gestured dismissively at Ilara. Surely you can see what she is. Her blood is thin, her lineage a disgrace. She is nothing. I cast her out for the good of my pack, to preserve the sanctity of our line. He was speaking to Rhys, but his eyes were locked on Ilara, willing her to break, to show a flicker of the pain he knew he had inflicted. But her expression remained infuriatingly calm. It was Lyra who spoke next, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. She stepped forward, her white gown shimmering, placing herself slightly in front of Kaelin in a gesture of protective ownership. My love, please, she said, her voice filled with a cloying sweetness. Don't trouble yourself with this. She's clearly just a sad, desperate creature, clinging to the past. She has come to see what she can never have, a loving mate, a strong pack, and a true heir. Lyra turned her gaze to Ilara, her eyes full of feigned pity. I truly am sorry for you, Ilara. It must be so painful to see all of this, to know that you are barren, that you could never give the Alpha King what I have given him. The word struck the air like a physical blow. Barren, the lie that had been the cornerstone of her exile, the lie that had justified his cruelty, the lie that was about to be spectacularly devastatingly annihilated. A slow smile touched Alara's lips, a chillingly beautiful expression that made the hairs on Lyra's arms stand on end. Baron, Alara repeated, her voice soft, yet it carried to every corner of the silent hall. Is that what you told him, Lyra? Is that the story you concocted to soothe his pride and secure your place on the throne? She took a step forward, her presence suddenly immense. You speak of lineage and heirs, Kaelin. You stand there, so proud of this one pup, this single proof of your pure line. You lecture me on my worth, on my blood. You, who were blinded by ambition and poisoned by the whispers of a jealous schemer. Her gaze flickered to Lyra, who flinched as if struck. You, who stood in this very hall and declared to the goddess and to your entire pack that I was a dead end, a worthless vessel. Kaelin's face darkened with rage. Silence! He roared, his alpha power lashing out, a wave of force meant to bring her to her knees. You will not speak to your king in that tone. But the wave of power broke harmlessly against the invisible shield of Rhys's own authority. Rhys didn't even flinch, but his eyes narrowed, a silent warning that Kaelin was treading on very dangerous ground. Alara stood completely unaffected, a testament to her own newfound strength and the protection of her ally. The pack gasped. Their Alpha King's power had been effortlessly neutralized. He had been challenged in his own hall, and he had been found wanting. Your king? Alara questioned, her voice laced with ice. You ceased to be my king the day you broke a sacred bond and threw a pregnant woman out into the wilderness to die. The word hung in the air, a thunderclap that shook the very foundations of the hall. Pregnant. A wave of shock rolled through the assembled guests. Whispers erupted, a growing buzz of disbelief and horrified speculation. Kaelin stared at her, his face a mask of confusion. What trickery is this? You were not pregnant. It's a lie, a desperate, pathetic lie to claim a stake in my glory. It is you who has been living a lie, Kaelin, Alara said, her voice rising, imbued with the arcane power of her father's lineage. It resonated in the bones of everyone present. You speak of proof. You want to see what a true lineage looks like? You are about to. She turned her head slightly, her gaze finding Anya, who stood waiting near the entrance. She gave a single sharp nod. It was time. The moment she had rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times was finally here. Anya moved to the great oak doors and pushed them open. For a moment, nothing happened. The hall was trapped in a state of suspended animation, every eye fixed on the doorway, every heart pounding with anticipation. And then they entered. 3 small children, walking hand in hand, their faces a mixture of awe and nervousness at the sight of the vast, silent crowd. 2 boys and a girl. They were dressed in the formal dark greens and silvers of the Shadow Femme pack. They were beautiful, healthy, and radiating an aura of power that was utterly stunning for children so young. They stopped just inside the hall, looking for their mother. The girl, with her dark hair and fierce little face, smiled when she saw Alara, a brilliant, heart-stopping smile. The 2 boys stood beside her, one with his mother's warm, hazel eyes and a calm, watchful demeanour. The other boy looked up, his gaze sweeping the room with an unnerving, innate authority. He had a shock of dark, unruly hair, a determined set to his small jaw, and eyes the colour of molten silver. The exact, unmistakable silver of the Alpha King. The collective gasp of the pack was a physical force, a tidal wave of sound that crashed through the hall. It was a sound of shock, of revelation, of a world being irrevocably upended. Time itself seemed to slow down, to fracture into 1,000 crystalline moments of dawning horror and understanding. Every eye in the room swiveled from the children at the door to the man on the dais, a frantic, disbelieving comparison. The resemblance was not just passing, it was absolute. The boy was a perfect miniature effigy of Kaelin himself, a living portrait of the Alpha King in his youth. The scent for a werewolf was the final, irrefutable truth. A complex, beautiful, and overwhelmingly powerful scent began to permeate the hall. It was Alara's essence, the scent of nightshade and rain-soaked earth, but woven through it, inseparable from it, was the unmistakable dominant scent of the Moonstone Alpha Royal line, the scent of coal mountain stone and lightning. It was Kaelin's scent, mirrored and magnified in his offspring. It was the scent of his firstborn son, and his second son, and his daughter, a triple blessed alpha lineage he had cast out into the snow. The POV shifted, the world narrowing to Kaelin's perspective. The sounds of the hall faded into a dull, roaring buzz in his ears. The faces of his guests blurred into a meaningless tapestry of gaping mouths and wide eyes. All he could see were the children. His mind, so certain and arrogant just moments before, was a maelstrom of denial and shattering realization. Lie. It's a trick, an illusion. His brain screamed the words, but his senses, the primal, infallible senses of a shifter, betrayed him. The scent was a key turning a lock deep within his soul. It was a scent he knew as well as his own, the scent of his blood, his legacy. It was pouring off those children, a proclamation louder than any words. He looked at the boy with his eyes, his silver eyes, the dominant alpha trait that had been the pride of his family for 1,000 years. It was a genetic seal, an unbreakable mark of his paternity. His gaze flickered to the other two children. He could see himself in the fierce set of the girl's jaw, in the quiet strength of the other boy. He saw Elara in them too, her grace, her spirit. They were not just his, they were theirs. The product of the sacred bond he had shattered. The word Elara had spoken echoed in his mind, no longer a lie, but a cataclysmic truth. Pregnant. She had been pregnant when he cast her out. He had thrown his pregnant mate, the mother of his children, his heirs, out to die. He had called her barren while she carried a blessing of 3. The full weight of his colossal error, his pride, his monumental stupidity, crashed down upon him. Everything he had done for the past 5 years, his bonding with Lyra, his obsession with a pure-blooded heir, this entire extravagant ceremony, was built on a lie he had not been told, but a lie he had been all too willing to believe because it suited his ambition. His eyes darted to Lyra. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The colour had drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll that was about to shatter. Her eyes were wide with panic. She knew. Of course, she knew. He saw it all in a flash of sickening clarity. Her subtle poisons, her carefully planted doubts, her feigned concern over Elara's flawed blood. She had played him like a fiddle, preying on his greatest weakness, his pride. And he, the mighty Alpha King, had been her fool. He felt a tremor in his hand, and looked down to see it resting on the gilded cradle. Inside, his son with Lyra, the pup he had just been proclaiming as the future of his pack, was now nothing more than a second-born, an heir to a lie. The children started walking towards their mother, their small legs carrying them across the vast stone floor. They moved with an unconscious grace and power that held the entire room spellbound. As they reached her, Elara knelt, opening her arms, and they rushed into her embrace. She hugged them tightly, a mother lioness with her cubs, her face buried in their hair. When she looked up again, her eyes found Kaelin's. There was no triumph in them, no gloating. There was only a vast, empty canyon of sorrow and pity. It was worse than any hatred she could have shown him. It was the look of a woman seeing a man for what he truly was, a fool who had traded a mountain of gold for a handful of dust. "You wanted to see a true lineage, Kaelin," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of his utter ruin. "Behold it, a son with your eyes and your alpha spirit, a son with my heart and my father's magic, a daughter with the fire of us both. This is the legacy you threw away." Then Rhys stepped forward, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. "By the ancient laws," he declared, his voice ringing with authority, "an alpha who casts out his pregnant mate forfeits all claim to his pups. They belong to the mother. They belong to her pack. These children are of the Shadowfen pack. They are under my protection. Any attempt to claim them will be considered an act of war against my people." It was a declaration, a final, unbreakable seal on Kaelin's fate. He had not just lost his heirs, he had lost them to a rival pack, to a rival alpha. He had not just made a mistake, he had committed an act of treason against his own bloodline, his own future. The pack was watching him, their expressions shifting from shock to confusion, and then, slowly, to a dawning, terrible anger. The elders, the keepers of their traditions, were looking at him with eyes full of contempt. He had been deceived, yes, but he had also been the deceiver. He had lied to them. He had broken the most sacred of laws. He had weakened their pack from the inside out. His kingdom, his power, his entire world was crumbling to dust at his feet, and he had no one to blame but himself. The silence that followed Rhys's declaration was heavier and more profound than any that had come before. It was the silence of a kingdom holding its breath, waiting for the final crumbling stone to fall. The pack members were no longer looking at Kaelin with awe or fear, but with a cold, calculating judgment. They were re-evaluating every decree he had made, every word he had spoken for the past 5 years. They were looking at Lyra not as their beautiful, fertile Luna, but as a usurper, a liar who had poisoned their king's mind and stolen the rightful queen's throne. The first to move was one of the pack elders, a grim-faced wolf named Gregor, whose loyalty to the old laws was absolute. He had been one of the few who had privately questioned Kaelin's decision 5 years ago, but he had been silenced by the king's authority. Now that authority was gone, replaced by the stench of shame and deceit. Gregor stepped down from his place of honour, his movements slow and deliberate, and walked to the centre of the hall. He did not look at Kaelin. Instead, he looked at the children, his ancient eyes softening for a moment as he took in the sight of the true royal heirs. Then he looked at Alara. He lowered his head in a gesture of profound respect and apology. "The laws were broken," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble that filled the hall. "A great injustice was done, not just to you, but to the future of this pack." His words were the first crack in the dam. A murmur of agreement swept through the pack. Others began to step forward, turning their backs on the dais, on their disgraced king and his false Luna. They were forming a new centre of power in the hall, a circle of silent judgment around Alara and her children. Kaelin watched, his face ashen, his mind numb. He tried to summon his alpha command, to roar them back into submission, but the power wouldn't come. It felt choked, strangled by the magnitude of his failure. His authority was not a divine right. It was a trust given to him by his people, and he had shattered that trust. He was a king with no subjects. His gaze fell on Lyra. She was trembling, her eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. The pack was looking at her with open hatred. She had been the architect of this disaster. She had whispered the poison, and now they were all paying the price. "He made the choice," she shrieked, her voice high and shrill with panic, shattering the last vestiges of her regal composure. "He chose me. He rejected her." Her desperate attempt to deflect the blame only sealed her fate. She was admitting her part in the conspiracy. Gregor turned his cold eyes on her. "You will be held to account for your treason, she-wolf," he stated, his voice utterly devoid of mercy. "The punishment for deceiving an alpha and endangering the royal bloodline is absolute." Lyra let out a sob of terror and shrank back against the cradle, her perfect world having fully imploded. Alara watched the scene unfold with a sense of detached finality. She had not come for this, not for their public shaming or their downfall. She had come for the truth. She had come to reclaim her own story, to show her children that they were not a source of shame, but a source of immense pride. Her purpose was fulfilled. She had no desire to stay and watch the carrion birds pick over the bones of Kaelin's ruined kingdom. She knelt down again, speaking softly to her children, who were looking at the chaos with wide, confused eyes. "It's time to go home," she whispered, her voice a promise of safety and love. She stood, taking Chaol's and Lyra's hands, while Caden clung to her leg. With Rhys at her side, and her honour guard closing ranks behind them, she turned her back on the dais, on Kaelin, on the entire mess of her past. She did not look back. She did not need to. The image of Kaelin's shattered face was burned into her memory forever. It was not an image of triumph, but of profound tragedy. He was a man who had been given everything, a fated mate, a triple blessing of heirs, the love of a good woman, and he had thrown it all away for the sake of his own vanity. As they walked towards the doors, the pack parted for them once more. This time it was not with shock, but with a deep, bottomless reverence. They were watching their true future walk out the door, lost to them forever because of the folly of their king. Heads were bowed. Some of the older she-wolves were openly weeping, mourning the loss of the children, the loss of their pack's honour. Just as they reached the threshold, a broken voice called out her name. Elara. It was Kaelin. He had stumbled down from the dais, his royal bearing gone, his eyes wild with desperation. He looked like a man drowning, reaching for a piece of driftwood. Please, he begged, his voice cracking. Don't. The boy. My son. He was looking at little Kyle, at the child with his silver eyes, his heir. The instinct of a father, so long denied, was finally, tortuously, breaking through his pride. Elara paused, but did not turn. Her back remained to him, a wall of finality. Rhys stepped forward slightly, placing himself between her and Kaelin, a silent, immovable barrier. You have no son here. Kaelin, Rhys said, his voice cold and absolute. You forfeited that right 5 years ago. This is Chaol of the Shadowfen Pack. They are all of the Shadowfen Pack. You would do well to remember that. With those final, devastating words, they stepped out of the great hall and into the cool evening air, leaving the ruin and the rage and the regret behind them. The heavy oak doors swung shut, closing a chapter of her life forever. The sounds of shouting and accusation from within were abruptly cut off, leaving only the peaceful sound of the wind in the trees. The war was over. The truth had won. And a new life, a true life, was just beginning. The journey away from Moonstone Ridge was the mirror opposite of the journey there. The air, once thick with tension and dread, now felt light, clean, and full of promise. The ghosts of the past had been faced and vanquished. They no longer had any power over her. Elara sat in the back of the vehicle with her children, holding them close, their warmth a reassuring anchor in the sea of her emotions. They were tired and confused by the day's events, but they were safe. That was all that mattered. Little Lyra looked up at her, her brow furrowed. Mama, why was that man so sad? She asked, her innocent question cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Elara stroked her daughter's hair, thinking of how to explain a tragedy of such magnitude to a 4-year-old. Because, my love, she said softly, he lost something very precious a long time ago, and he only just realised it today. Caden, her quiet, observant son, looked from her to Rhys, who was now sitting beside Anya in the front, his presence a silent, watchful comfort. Is he the bad man who hurt you? Caden asked. Yes, Elara admitted, no longer afraid of the truth. He was, but he can't hurt us anymore. We're going home. The word home tasted sweet on her tongue. For so long, the concept had been a source of pain, a memory of a place she could never return to. Now, home was not a place of stone and timber, but a feeling. It was the safety of Rhys's pack, the loyalty of her friends, the love of her children. Home was Shadowfen. As the miles passed, a deep sense of peace settled over her. It was not the giddy feeling of victory, but the profound, quiet satisfaction of justice. She had not destroyed Kaelin. His own actions had destroyed him. She had not sought revenge. She had sought truth. She had returned to the scene of her greatest weakness and demonstrated her greatest strength. She had not needed to raise her voice, cast a spell, or lift a single weapon. Her very existence and the existence of her children had been enough to shatter a kingdom built on lies. Rhys looked back at her, his dark eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of her courage, her strength. In his gaze, she saw not just support, but a deep and abiding love. He was the man who had seen her at her worst, a broken refugee on the edge of death, and had patiently helped her rebuild herself into something stronger, something more. He had never tried to possess her or control her. He had simply walked beside her, offering his strength as a shield until she was ready to wield her own. When they finally crossed the border back into Shadowfen territory, it felt like taking the first breath of clean air after being trapped in a tomb. The very magic of the land seemed to welcome them back, a gentle, nurturing energy that soothed their weary souls. The pack was waiting for them. As their convoy pulled up to the great hall, they poured out, not with the stunned silence of the Moonstone pack, but with cheers and howls of welcome. They surrounded Alara and the children, nuzzling them, offering words of love and support. They were her people, her true pack. That night, after the children were safely asleep in their beds, their dreams untroubled by the drama of their lineage, Alara stood once more on the balcony overlooking the valley. The moon was full, casting a gentle silver light over the world. Rhys came to stand beside her, wrapping a warm cloak around her shoulders. "It is done," he said quietly. "You are free." "I am," she agreed, leaning back against his solid frame. "Thank you, Rhys, for everything. I could not have done it without you." "You would have found a way," he countered, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "Your strength was always your own. I just held up a mirror so you could see it for yourself." They stood in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the stars. The future was an open, unwritten page. The children would grow up knowing their full heritage, but they would do so in a place where they were judged by their character, not their blood. They would be loved, cherished, and protected. And Alara, for the first time since she was a young girl, felt truly, completely safe. She was no longer Alara the hybrid, Alara the outcast, Alara the rejected mate. She was Alara of the Shadow Fen pack, a mother, a survivor, a woman of immense power and worth. She had walked through the fire of her past and emerged not burned, but forged. Was she right to return? Was it an act of vengeance or an act of necessary justice? Some might say she should have left the past buried, that she risked too much by confronting the man who broke her. But to leave the truth unspoken would have been to live a life half-lived, to allow a lie to stand as history. She had done it not just for herself, but for the 3 innocent children who deserved to have their story told, to have their existence acknowledged. She had reclaimed her narrative, not with anger, but with undeniable truth. And in doing so, she had not only freed herself, but had also set in motion the cleansing of a sick and arrogant kingdom. The fate of Moonstone Ridge was no longer her concern. Let the pack choose a new alpha, one worthy of their loyalty. Let Kaelin and Lyra face the consequences of their own dark deeds. Her path led forward into the light, with a new family, a new home, and a future of her own making. The past was finally where it belonged, behind her.